Hello, I'm Jenny Gill, drama therapist, and this series of videos is about helping you, the parent, with your child, especially during the coronavirus pandemic, and helping with their emotional health. So there are several videos. One of them is an introduction that tells you about who I am and what I do and why I'm doing this. And once a week I'm going to do a sort of story time. Now, obviously stories are really great for children and young people and adults. Even adults love story. You know, I love to watch a good film, and that part of that is the story that you watch these characters go through. And reading stories to your children is really, really beneficial. But I want to bring some stories to you that I will tell. And part of that is that I want to encourage your children to use their imagination, because that is really good for their mental health, to be able to express themselves. And if you use a storybook, they're more likely to try and copy the pictures that are in the book. So that's partly why I'd like to introduce you to some of the stories that I use in my practice. Today's story is called The Story of the Early People, and it's one of my most favourite stories and one that I use loads and loads in my work. Unfortunately, I have no idea where I've picked this story up, which is one of the magical things about proper storytelling is that it's told verbally, and so there's nothing written down. And I'm sure it comes from somewhere, so if you know where it comes from or where I even picked it up from, then please do let me know. But it's a story about transition, it's a story about struggle, it's a story about going from darkness to light, from chaos to order, and all these kind of things that symbolically are really relevant for the situation at the moment. One of my recommendations is I'm going to tell the story at the end of the video, and what I recommend you do is talk to your child about which parts of the story they liked, and maybe even offer to have a drawing session with them where they draw a picture of the part of the story that they particularly liked, or the character that they particularly liked. And this, you know, within the way that drama therapy works, this pinpointing of particular parts of a story is a way of expressing themselves. That's the thing that they need to express at that moment. So it might be that there's one character that's particularly worried about things, or another that's another that's overcome with fear, or another that's trying to answer a question, or whatever it is. Sometimes your child might not be able to verbalise how they're feeling exactly, and so using stories and characters within stories can be really, really beneficial. So you could even act the story out again if you wanted to, if you felt bold enough, if you've got some finger puppets, or if you wanted to get the teddies out, or if you wanted to, if a child's older, if you wanted them to write a poem about it, or even rewrite the story in their own words. You could do so many different things with it. So I'll leave it over to you, and maybe in our comments people can say the kinds of things that they've done with their children. Again, it's an activity that you can do together, which is bonding and really beneficial for your child. So I hope you enjoy it, and here goes. Are you sitting comfortably? I'm Jenny, and this is the story of the early people. The early people lived a very, very long time ago. And when they lived underground. They managed quite well underground. They managed to eat and talk and sit down and go to sleep, all the things that we do. The only difference was they couldn't see because it was so dark down there. And one day they started saying to each other, I wonder what it's like above the surface, above the ground. I wonder what it's like there. And they started to talk about it in a group. And they were saying, well, how will we ever find out? What could we do? And then one of them suggested that they ask Mole, the animal Mole. And they said, well, because Mole digs up to the surface, so maybe he'd be able to tell us what it's like up there. So they called Mole over to their group, And they asked him, Mole, what is it like above the surface? And Mole thought for a moment. And then he said, well, I don't know if it's different, but it definitely smells different up there. But I can't see, so I don't know if it looks different or even what it looks like. So they chatted again and they said, well, maybe we should try and get Mole to take us to the surface. I mean, things are getting a bit tricky not being able to see, and we'd like to be able to see whether it's better up there for us. So they asked Mole, and Mole agreed, and they all stood in a long line, and Mole was at the front, and he began to dig, and he was digging up, and as he dug, he passed the soil back to the person behind him, and they passed it to the person behind them, and it all went down the line until it got to the last person, and the last person had to put that soil back where they lived. So as they dug and as they journeyed up, their old home was getting filled up and they wouldn't be able to go back there. And it was a really long journey, and they kept getting soil in their eyes and it was dirty and coughing and spluttering and all sorts, until finally they reached the surface. Now when they reached the surface, the light was so bright that they had to cover their eyes because it hurt so much, it was so bright. And then they started to say to each other, well, this is exactly the same as it was underground. It's no different, we can't see anything. And then they heard the voice of an old lady, and the old lady said, if you take away your fingers, one by one, your eyes will become accustomed to the light, and you'll be able to see. So they did that. They took away their fingers one by one, and their eyes became accustomed to the light. And then they could see the incredible colours all over the place, in the grass, in the trees, in the sky, in the flowers. Everywhere they looked, there were different colours. And even though that journey had been really hard and difficult, and they couldn't go back, they were really glad they'd made that journey to the surface. I hope you enjoyed the story.